Welcome to today's webinar. Unfortunately, our previous attempt at this was beset with some technical difficulties, as I'm sure many of you are aware. We've been practicing it all morning, so hopefully it's going to run a lot more smoothly today. My name's Simon Turner. I'm the Engagement Manager for the National Highways Driving for Better Business programme, and I'm also the Chairman of the Association for Road Risk Management, both of which have supported Project Edward since it began in 2016. Today's presentation is a roundtable discussion on commercial vehicle driver wellbeing. It's a discussion that we recorded recently at Volvo Trucks National Headquarters in Warwick. We're going to play the recording now, which lasts about 40 minutes, and then the panelists will be joining us live at the end to take your questions. While you're watching the presentation, if you've got any questions, please type them in the chat and we'll monitor those, and then I'll put them to the panelists after the discussion. It was a great conversation, and I'm sure you're going to enjoy it, so we'll start playing that now. Hello, and a warm welcome to this first web event from Project Edward for 2025. My name's Simon Turner, and I'm delighted to be in the chair for an in-depth discussion on commercial driver safety and wellbeing that's brought to you with support from the Warwickshire Police and Crime Commissioners Road Safety Fund. Here to offer his own introduction is the PCC himself, Mr. Philip Seckham.
Warwickshire stands at the heart of commerce and industry in the UK. Our strategic location places us at the centre of the country's major road networks, with more miles of motorway than almost anywhere else. This unique position brings both opportunities and responsibilities. As the county's Police and Crime Commissioner, I'm committed to leading the way in how we care for and interact with drivers, especially those in the commercial sector. I do understand the pressures faced by businesses, but I firmly believe that personal safety and road safety must always come first. My goal here is clear: to reduce deaths and serious injuries in Warwickshire by 50% by 2030. To achieve this ambitious target, we need the full support and cooperation of commercial drivers, transport operators, and fleet managers. Everyone has a critical role in this mission, which has the health and well-being of our truck and van drivers at its core. After all, these are the people who keep our economy moving. I do want to extend my support to you and encourage your participation in making our roads safer. Together, we can change behaviours and create a safer road environment for everyone in Warwickshire, whether you live here or are just travelling through. So let's work hand in hand to ensure that our county continues to be a great place to do business, with the safest possible roads, so that everyone gets home safely every day. Thank you.
Warwickshire PCC, Philip Seckham there. And so to this morning's running order. In this first web event from Project Edward for 2025, we'll be putting the safety and well-being of commercial lorry drivers under the microscope. We'll be looking at the typical causations of collisions and incidents involving HGV drivers. We'll look at some of the key challenges for truck driver health and well-being, including an invisible epidemic that you're probably not aware of. And finally, we'll look at some actions that could reduce these collisions and the impact they can have on all of us. All this and many other topics in the next 45 minutes, with time afterwards given over to your questions, which you can submit at any time through the chat function, and which will be discussed by our contributors, who we'll meet in a moment.
Commercial lorry drivers face numerous challenges on the roads of the UK. Safety concerns include navigating heavy traffic, dealing with road rage, and manoeuvring large vehicles in poor weather conditions. Long hours lead to fatigue and isolation, impacting mental health. Physical health can suffer due to lack of exercise and poor nutrition options. Drivers can struggle with tight delivery schedules and pressure to meet deadlines. Security is a major issue, with inadequate safe parking facilities forcing many drivers to use unsecured locations. The demanding nature of the job and the burden of responsibility it carries inevitably contributes to stress and anxiety.
Now, I'm pleased to present our panellists for this conversation.
Hi, thank you. I'm Kate Walker from the Diabetes Safety Organisation, and we help companies and the industry understand the risks from diabetes in the workplace.
Hello, good morning. My name is Inspector Simon Paul. I'm from Warwickshire Police and I'm a traffic inspector.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Chris Lewis. I'm from the Warwickshire Police and Crime Commissioner's Office and I'm his road safety lead.
Hello, I'm Mark Cartwright. I head up the Commercial Vehicle Incident Prevention Team at National Highways and I'm also the Senior Responsible Officer for our Driving for Better Business engagement campaign.
Welcome, everybody. Mark, if I could come to you first. What are the main factors that contribute to HGV incidents, collisions on the motorway network?
It's probably not what people tend to think, but it is, to be honest. When we look back at the fatal collisions and serious collisions on our network, rarely do we find a crash where the initial causation was actually anything to do with the vehicle or the load. It tends to be around driver performance issues and very much around distraction, fatigue, impairment and medical conditions, which isn't to say the vehicle condition didn't make things get worse quickly, but rarely is the initial causation anything other than driver performance issues.
And Si, maybe if I can come to you next. The police have got to sort out these messes when things go wrong. So what are the main issues you see from those? What are the sort of key types of collision, I guess, that you see on the roads of Warwickshire?
So for us, obviously, most of the time when it involves a HGV, it often involves fast road network, so the motorway network, which obviously then causes problems for us attending the incident as well as other emergency services, but also causes great issues for the travelling public behind that incident. For us especially, it's a case of the term we all know of rubberneckers, which causes us great issues because often when dealing with these types of incidents, we also have separate incidents due to people rubbernecking on the motorway.
And Chris, to sort of follow on from that, do you see particular types of excuse or whatever that kind of drivers come out with in the area in Warwickshire about what maybe they were thinking about, what sort of behaviour was that led to these? Do you get a feel for the sort of typical excuses that come out for that kind of behaviour?
I think people using the road network in general probably tend to think someone's been going too fast or they've been driving carelessly. That's probably sort of like the throwaway remarks people will use if they've seen something, particularly on the motorway. But of course, we don't know that's the fact until Si and his colleagues have done a full investigation. But I think there is a general concern that a lot of the crashes that we deal with have come about as a result of excess speed or careless driving. People probably don't understand the more complex issues that sit behind why drivers have chosen to drive at excess speed or drive carelessly, like driver fatigue and so on.
And some of that carelessness, I guess, is manifested in some of the incidents that come about where trucks are colliding with smaller vehicles, cars and vans and that kind of thing. And Mark, I know National Highways did a big campaign recently around blind spots and trying to raise awareness of what truck drivers can see and what they can't. What sort of challenges do truck drivers face being so close to other road users?
It's interesting. The message we were trying to get across with the campaign that you mentioned, Si, is it's a dual responsibility. Everything around safety on our roads is a shared responsibility. So it's a responsibility of the HGV driver. They're the professionals. Make sure they are absolutely clear that they're able to manoeuvre before they commit to a manoeuvre. But equally for other motorists, just be aware of the limitations of visibility that HGV driver has. I know it sounds a little bit flippant, but you know, I've had drivers speak to me, we're not trying to kill people, we just don't know they're there. So just make sure if you are passing, it's clear to pass. If it's not clear to pass that HGV, hold back until it is. And certainly for the HGV drivers and operators, is just be double sure that there's nothing there before you manoeuvre.
And Kate, sort of coming to you, what we've talked about there really covers driver behaviour and maybe some vehicle issues as well. So they're things that can
clearly they're kind of choices on the day as to whether that happened. But you've worked in long-term healthcare for over 2 decades now. What do you see kind of different to that, where maybe long-term health issues play a part in how some of those collisions came about?
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the challenges is with long-term health conditions, because they're long-term, people forget they may have a day-to-day impact. It's just what they live with. They've forgotten those implications. We see all sorts of, from fatigue right through to all the other complexities that happen over time with conditions, whether lack of sensation in their feet. It could be a blood pressure day. We don't know what's happening, but because they live with it and don't necessarily see the fluctuations, they just get behind the wheel regardless. And I think that's a real challenge. And in addition to that, for many people, they may not know they have medical conditions. Maybe they've not had regular checkups. Maybe they're living with things they don't know. And again, we all get used to just feeling not quite right. That becomes a new norm. We get behind a wheel and never think again about what impact that has, whether our reaction times have slowed down, whether we're not quite as in control of the vehicle. And these aren't things that people consider from health, and they don't relate that to driving any sort of vehicle.
So I guess it's probably quite rare that one particular thing causes some of these accidents. Quite often they're, I would say, accidents, incidents, collisions. We don't like calling them accidents. But there's probably, in many cases, a combination of some of these factors that are at play in any incident. So maybe get each of your thoughts on how all of those things we've discussed about drivers, vehicles and health issues, that kind of thing, how they interplay. Maybe Cyber could come to you first on that.
Yeah, so we are noticing a trend recently of drivers being potentially unfit to drive, and that could be due to a number of factors around medicals, around potentially age, and also not just feeling how they should when they're getting into a vehicle, which ultimately is a heavy missile on the road that is potentially lethal, and people aren't understanding that when they're driving every day. I think also what we are noticing is people being distracted at the wheel, and then potentially causing a collision, and that could be a multitude of reasons around potentially mobile phone issues, other people in the car, but also quite recently with the technology improving in vehicles, it means people are often distracted because they're using other bits of technology in the car instead of actually concentrating on the driving and concentrating on the road.
Chris, you got any thoughts on that?
Well, particularly in the commercial driver context, I personally have a great concern about the economic factors at play. The roads are really busy. We've probably never seen so many commercial vehicles on the road, ranging from the biggest HGV to the sort of the gig economy, the typical delivery driver. And I think there's massive economic pressures at play for people to ensure their businesses are thriving and the customers are getting what they want within really tight timelines. And I think a price is being paid for that, personally.
Yeah. And you say that would manifest itself as maybe unrealistic delivery schedules for drivers because the company is taking, or the employer is taking on so much work. They don't want to disappoint customers. And to a certain extent, we're partly to blame for that, aren't we? Because we're demanding next day delivery, sometimes same day delivery from when we're ordering stuff online, and it all contributes.
Everyone's got a stake in it. And I think, the bigger the expectations go up, the bigger the promises, the bigger we will deliver, something has to give somewhere. But what we don't want is that price being paid on the roads. Because we're determined to have less casualties, less death and serious injury. And so we want people to behave properly. Respecting economic pressures, it's what drives the country, but we've got to get the balance right.
And I think, Mark, sort of following on from that, we've got, all sorts of commercial vehicle drivers, whether they're fleets of service engineers, whether they're delivery drivers, and that kind of thing. The drivers themselves often don't have the autonomy over their routes, do they? It's set by software that tells them the time they need to be at a particular stop. They've got to, whenever I've got something delivered, I only had one a couple of days ago, I was trying to engage in conversation with the delivery driver because there was a slight issue, and he goes, "I'm really sorry, I've only got 30 seconds. I've got to be on the road again, else the computer starts penalising me or whatever." Yeah, that's a real issue for drivers, isn't it?
I think it can do. I think most businesses do actually manage the kind of scheduling, at least on a relatively sensible point of view. And I am becoming increasingly aware of drivers almost imposing their own schedules to try and get ahead of the business's schedule, if that makes sense. But absolutely it is. I think one of the things that plays on my mind all the time with this is that for most of us, driving is easily the most dangerous thing that we do on any regular kind of basis. But we all, whether we're professional commercial vehicle drivers or a public member of the public, we get lulled into this false sense of security. And just the fact that it has never gone wrong doesn't mean that it couldn't go wrong now. And that's exactly the issues. I've done this route 1,000 times. I've never had an issue before. Well, that doesn't matter. You've had an issue with it now. And I think an awareness of that level of risk and an awareness of I would argue, the additional responsibility that professional commercial vehicle drivers have, and that the key word there is professional, is what they do, is they need to step up on occasions. The businesses need to provide drivers with regular. But coming back to the kind of general point about the timescales, one of the things that we really encourage in organisations is the development of a psychologically safe culture. One of the things that really, I guess, winds me up post-incident is so often the warning signs are there. We knew that this guy's it's permanently 5 minutes late. We know that they're maybe not sleeping at night, maybe they've got some kind of issues at home, etc., etc. But it's no point just pointing it out after the crash. Why aren't we joining the dots? Why aren't we making it an environment where people feel able to speak out before the tragedy hits?
And Kate, sort of follow on from that then. So drivers with health issues, we've got some that may be undiagnosed that could result in a contribution to a collision at some point. But if a driver knows that they've got a health condition, and maybe that's worrying, how does that play on their mind? Because I guess an employer that doesn't suffer from that same condition probably doesn't imagine fully the impact it can have on a driver's ability to concentrate. And it's a distraction. It's a thought distraction, isn't it? And we were talking about distractions earlier. So how does that play in?
Absolutely. I think it plays in a lot, and I think it's quite interesting. I do think we're starting to see that there is people who are fearful to say, especially in this environment, about their condition because they don't know they're going to lose their job. I think there's a lack of recognition of what protection or safety they've got, and if they came forward, actually the right schedules could be put in place. A lot of safety mechanisms are available in the workplace, but there's a fear to come forward. There's a stigma still around some conditions, maybe job loss fears. And I think that plays a big host to them not coming forward. They'll check their vehicles, but actually they're not checking themselves as driving that vehicle. And I think this is something that we really want to start to see is it is safe to check yourselves. That makes the whole safety mechanism much better. The vehicles are checked phenomenally. We don't think about the person driving to have their regular checks. Our MOTs aren't yearly in the UK. They're not checked till 45 in some of the industry requirements. And so they're sat there either choosing not to go and find out because of fear of job loss. That's a challenge. Or they're fearful to disclose, which, as you say, then sits in their mind going, but what happens if, or what next? And as Mark was saying, this then plays into that culture. We thought there was something wrong, but we didn't do anything. We are checking vehicles daily. Why are we not giving that same opportunity? Because actually it will keep people in work longer. It will make the roads safer. And I think it would take a lot of pressure and additional stress off people driving as well.
And meanwhile, the drivers on the road, all of that going round in their head and not concentrating. And
Zach, can I just add in relation to that? So from the police point of view, we want to be able to, help HGV drivers to be able to do their daily business and stay, continuing driving. We have to get involved sometimes, obviously post-incident, unfortunately, where we can then refer drivers for medicals. And we are actually looking more at sort of carrying out operations in Warwickshire, whereby we will be, setting up a checkpoint, and we can refer people to attend a medical. We don't want to be getting to that stage. We want people to be on the road because they know they're fit, and they've opened up to their employer if there is a medical condition the employer can help them with. rather than us having to get involved, like I say, post-incident or actually stopping at the roadside to demand someone get a medical. We can do it, but it's not something that we like to do because ultimately we don't want to impact on people's lives.
Yeah, and yeah, I think it's something that all companies need to try and foster, that culture where it's okay to speak up about it.
I think the other thing to bear in mind, and maybe it is the elephant in the room, we know we're talking about a very male-orientated industry. And, if I can say this as a member of the male gender, is we're predisposed not to go anywhere near doctors if we can absolutely avoid it, So there is that. The reality is the average age of an HGV driver is getting towards 60. And, I sat through a fairly terrifying presentation a year or so ago for a fellow of my age, where just from a statistical point of view, by your late 50s, you're almost bound to be carrying some medium to long-term health issue, whether that be diabetes or musculoskeletal or something, blood pressure. By the time you're in your early 60s, it's probably 2 conditions. By the time you're mid-60s, you're probably statistically carrying 2 or 3 long-term conditions. And I think not just from a driver's point of view, there needs to be an awareness of that, but from an employer's point of view, there needs to be an awareness that they probably ought to be asking some probing questions, having that right kind of culture to come back to that, where drivers, are able to speak up and say, look, I think I'm developing an issue, blah, 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 blah. But unless we have that open playing field, unless we have that open culture, that probably isn't going to happen easily.
Simon, can I just make a connection with culture, but also safe systems? Because I think this conversation is a great moment to sort of like promote within the commercial industry stronger culture around safe systems, because this is what we're talking about at the end of the day, and to be comfortable with a safe systems culture. And whether that's safety around the driver, the individual, or safety around the vehicle. But for me, this whole narrative fits perfectly with safe systems, which is what we're adopting and promoting in Warwickshire. So for me, the two go together. And the culture of the organisation, the culture of the individual driver should be about safety.
Yeah, absolutely agree. Let's dig into the health and wellbeing issue a little bit more. Geotab, vehicle technology provider to many fleets, did some research recently which showed that 90% of commercial vehicle drivers cited work-related stress as having a negative impact on their driving standards, and that 50% of those are considered even chucking in the job completely because that was becoming intolerable. Mark, is that a situation that you recognise, and if so, how's it got so bad?
Yeah, it doesn't come as any great surprise to me. And I think, just stop and think about it. These guys and girls are in stressful positions, special conditions. They're driving heavy vehicles, large vehicles on congested roads. Of course, there's a level of stress involved with that. But the other big thing for me is that recognition that these individuals are absolutely intrinsic to our way of life. And it again, it's one of those things that gives me a degree of stress, is how little respect many people, many organisations have of these individuals. They end up sleeping in their vehicles in lay-bys on the road. They don't have access to proper sanitary opportunities. I'm trying to find a divorce. But they don't have the access to those kind of things. They're always at fear of their vehicles being robbed when they're parked up overnight, etc., etc. And that's where the change ought to be. These are valuable contributors to society. You just think back to the awful days of the pandemic. They were essential workers. They were recognised as being heroes, for want of a better phrase. That all seems to have disappeared.
I was going to come on to that a little bit later, but I'll talk about it now. Chris, I guess one of the issues I wanted to look at was the security of drivers, and sort of when they're parked up at night, security of their vehicles. What sort of risks do they face? Because that's really going to play on your mind, isn't it?
Well, I was genuinely shocked not so long back. I read a national research report from one of the specialist areas within police in NAVSIS. They work on a national and international basis and look at vehicle theft and so on and so forth. And I was staggered at the degree of crime and organised crime by serious criminals being perpetrated against the HGV industry. I mean, some of the crimes were so audacious and downright dangerous, I had to read it a few times to believe it. So the scale of the criminality against the HGV industry is huge. It's national, it's international. It happens here in Warwickshire, in lay-bys, at motorway service areas. Size people are working hard on that. But it is something that is little understood, not sufficiently prioritised. And again, if today's conversation is about waking some people up to the scale of the risks and threats in this industry, certainly the crime being perpetrated against the HGV industry, and to a lesser degree the smaller vehicles, but which are commercial, it's big. And in police, even in policing itself, there's always a competition for priorities. Who gets the resources? What's the most important crime, if you like, that we've got to be policing? And you might say for too long, roads-related issues hasn't been high enough. But when you look at the scale of the crime, the type of criminality, there's aggression used, there's violence used, the overall value of the crime is huge. We need to have a fresh look at things.
It's like Chris said, you have to quite often deal with these kind of crimes. Have you got any examples, the sorts of things the drivers have to endure?
Well, I've actually got one from last night, whereby in a service station in Warwickshire, we've actually put a proactive operation on last night with my traffic staff, and we detained 4 suspects for conspiracy to steal from the lorries at a service station. Yes, that was only last night, but I could tell you that story numerous times over the last sort of year or so. This is a national problem, as Chris said. It is unfortunately happening across the country. It is unfortunately happening within Warwickshire. We cannot be in all the service stations all the time with the staffing issues that we have on occasions. We would love to be able to put traffic officers in each of the service stations throughout Warwickshire to deter this type of crime, along with our neighbour colleagues. We simply can't do that. We are seeing, unfortunately, an upsurge in, as Chris said, offences happening against HGV drivers within our force area. Yes, we are putting on proactive operations when we can, and also during our routine patrols. Our strategy is to patrol service stations. Going back to what was said earlier, some HGV drivers will put into a lay-by. Most HGV drivers want to go somewhere safe, which would be a service station. Unfortunately, at this moment in time, it's not as safe as what it should be for HGV drivers in service stations, and we're trying to combat that. And as Chris said, unfortunately, HGV drivers are being targeted not by often one subject. We're talking an organised criminal gang. We're talking about at least 4 or 5 subjects from different vehicles approaching an individual HGV driver with some serious violence to be able to steal the contents of the lorry, or even the lorry itself and drive it off. It is a massive concern of us within Warwickshire Police, but I also know nationally, and we are working with NAVSIS quite closely within Warwickshire Police.
So, I mean, I'm sure everyone understands that you don't have the resources to go and man every single place where a lorry might park up for the night, but where there are these sort of lorry parks and service areas, are there improvements that you think could reasonably be made to make life easier for the
within Warwickshire Police? We work closely with our road safety partnership and our partners, which Chris chairs. We are working closely, which Chris will be able to talk to you about with our partners at the services. So the management of services to make the services safer, whether that be through lighting, CCTV, whatever we can do to try and look after the health and well-being of the HGV drivers and the wider public, but also the staff at the service station, so that these criminals don't feel that it's an easy target to go to these locations. So whilst we work closely with a partnership in relation to that, it does take a multitude of agencies to be able to get to a situation where we have made improvements, and unfortunately it does take a bit of time. we are working closely with the partnership, as I say, but obviously these things cost money, and often it will take time for us to be able to dedicate our resources to it.
Yeah. And Mark, coming to you, National Highways has recently announced a £30 million investment to improve lorry parking facilities. Is that going to address any of these issues?
Well, I hope so. And it's not something my team are directly involved with, but the intention, I know, is to certainly make the facilities more attractive to drivers in terms of the security levels that are there, but also their access to, you know, the what they need to manage their own well-being, good food, hydration. I even heard some talk of sort of his outdoor gym equipment, you know. So the intention is there, and hopefully will prove to be a step in the right direction.
Yeah. And these security issues, I guess, you know, one of the things we always tell people who drive long distances is to, you know, eat well, get out and take some exercise. But it sounds like in these situations, they can't get out and take any exercise because they're scared of getting mugged. But that whole thing around exercise and diet improving stress, you know, these guys can't do that. So, or might not have their facilities to do that, some of these areas. But that causes a significant problem in its own right, doesn't it, Kate? And you've been doing a lot of work, of research around diabetes and how big a problem that is in the workplace generally, but actually how much more significant that problem is in the world of commercial vehicle drivers. And you've just recently done some research with the RHA, I think, as well, haven't you? You want to tell us a little bit about what you found with that?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think all of these are contributing factors. You know, the human body is a complicated thing, and lots of factors, including stress, sleep patterns, as you say, exercise, food, all contribute to maybe less desirable health. And one of the things we focus on is diabetes. We know that 1 in 12 in the workforce have diabetes. And then, as you say, we've been looking at the data into haulage and logistics with the Road Haulage Association. And actually what we're starting to find is it's 1 in 6 people who drive for a living have diabetes, who drive professionally for a living. And over 55, it's 1 in 3. So these numbers are really startling. The survey was really telling for us, and a little more than we were anticipating, that stigma that we know exists, and perception is very much alive and in there of, well, I'll lose my job, the results that were coming back and what people were sharing. People are having hypos. One had a severe hypo. Didn't say whether it's behind the wheel. I'm hoping it wasn't, but in the workplace, and they're suffering from hypos, again, touching on the timings and the inability to have long enough to either stop for medication or for food. It really is a huge challenge. As I say, we're really starting to get some live data now of this industry specifically. But what we do know is we are struggling to get people to get their time to go to the doctors. They're struggling to find the time maybe to get that healthy food or an option that is available. And overall, one of the challenges that is faced is a lot don't want to know if they've got diabetes. There's 1 million people in the UK undiagnosed. We do think there could be a higher percentage here because of lack of education. If I've got it, can I still drive? And we want to get out there and educate on that because, yes, absolutely, there's no blanket bans in the UK for driving. And actually, if we can catch it earlier, we can keep them safer and in work for longer. It's the leaving it that's the challenge. So for us, it's really how do we get hold and support and bring in education around diabetes, which poses a real risk on our roads.
You mentioned having a hypo. What is a hypo, and what's the potential impact on the driver? I guess the more general impact, but also if they were to have one while they were driving.
Yeah, certainly. And there's 2. So we'll do hypo and then hyper. So hypo is when blood sugars drop really low quite quickly, generally caused by medicines. Insulin's well known for diabetes. So got 1 million people in the UK on diabetes, 400,000 type 1s, but 600,000 type 2s. And we think there's quite a lot maybe in the haulage industry and logistics with type 2 on insulin. What happens is a medicine pulls the blood sugar low really quickly if it's not been well managed at that moment. And it's almost like people can look drunk or pass out, act really bizarrely because their blood sugars have dropped rapidly. And at that point, if they're behind a wheel, those risks are huge. As I say, so we do know that blackouts happen. We do know that people act as if either high as a kite or slump or slur. Concentration and speed of reaction is instantly changed. There are DVLA regulations around insulin. Again, we're not always sure that everyone understands those, particularly type 2s. type 1 people living with type 1 diabetes have often had it from a young age, so we'll know, and it's a daily job for them, an hourly job. For type 2 on insulin, often given out by general practitioners, a lot less education, poses a greater risk. And then the opposite side of that is our undiagnosed. So we know there's 1 million approximately in the UK with undiagnosed diabetes, and the risks there is high blood sugars. So the risks for us, from our understanding, is over time damage starts happening internally when blood sugars are held high. So what we'll start to see is damage to their eyes and damage to their feet as a key too when we talk about driving. And over time, they may not be able to feel the full sensation on the base of the feet. And the research that we're doing is showing that people's time in either full pedal or less pedal is huge. They can't find that middle range. So the risk of accidents is massively increased with these risks.
Thanks, Kate. So before we start to wrap up the discussion, we're just going to hear a couple of minutes insight from a professional truck driver, Matt Ireland.
I'm a freelance truck driver, transport historian and journalist, scuba dive instructor, amongst many other things. The biggest problem with transport and mental health, in my eyes, is the average age of a truck driver in the UK is 57. Speaking to the older generation as such, it becomes a problem because of the word mental. I've reached out previously to people who are older than me, and as soon as I'm talking about their mental health, they think that I'm classing them as actually mental, which is a real issue and a stigma that's slowly evaporating, but it's not quite enough. The problem is truck driving is a very lonely job. Some are worse than others, some are not too bad, but I've known people to go for a whole day without any human interaction, which is quite concerning, really. It's one thing picking up a phone and phoning somebody, but to actually physically see somebody and engage in a conversation, it can make a heck of a difference. And I know a friend of mine, it's a bit of an extreme case, but he was working in Canada and he went for several days literally without seeing a person. And he told me it really was affecting his mental health. It's going to get better with getting people to speak about it. It's kind of twofold. There is a lot more women coming into the industry, which is a great thing, and women aren't afraid to talk, whereas men are. And trying to get men to speak openly about any mental health issues is a real concern because people just won't. There was a chap earlier this year. He was only a young guy, quite a popular man apparently. I didn't know him at all, and sadly he took his own life because he was suffering from depression because he didn't reach out to anybody. And we really need to try and combat that. It's very difficult. I mean, from a truck driver's point of view, you could get up at 3 o'clock in the morning, so you don't see anybody, make your food and flask, off you go out the door. So your sleep has been affected. So you're not nobody's really chipper at 3 or 4 in the morning, really, to be honest. So you then go to work and then you're beating the traffic. Then the traffic starts building up, so you're getting stressed through that. You get to the delivery point, people treat you like absolute dirt or worse. So that's just putting a strain on you. Then you've got to try and park up at night. There's complete lack of facilities in this country, complete apathy about load theft, diesel thefts, and all these things play on your mind. And it can really, really get to you. And without reaching out, it's very hard for people to actually acknowledge they're having problems with their mental health. And we need to try and get people to realise it's okay to speak. It's very difficult, but I think it's possible to do. So hopefully these things will slowly start to improve, but we just need to try and improve the whole job, everything surrounding it, I guess, which is a monumental task, to be honest. But small steps, I think we could create something, a much nicer living and working environment and more positive for people, especially drivers' mental health.
So that was a really interesting piece, and I think it shows how a lot of the issues we've discussed over the last sort of 15, 20 minutes as we were discussing health and well-being plays into his life and many, many thousands of other truck drivers. So I think as we sort of wrap up the discussion, I'd like to come to each of you for some final thoughts on what is being done, what could be done to improve the safety and welfare of our truck drivers across the country. Chris, can I come to you first?
Of course, yes.
For some final thoughts.
Yeah. I think what I'm taking away from today is that we need to value truck drivers far more, and I'll ensure the Police and Crime Commissioner will be determined to do that. Clearly, our truck drivers are not valued enough across the whole board. I've learned today the average age, 57 years of age. We need to get young people attracted into the industry. It is a viable career. It's a hugely professional career, requires fantastic skill sets. And I think my closing thought is demonstrate that we value our truck drivers. They are the lifeblood of the country, and we need to do more to value them. And by valuing them, I'm absolutely sure that will play a positive part in safer roads.
Si?
Yeah, so for me, I've discussed that HGV drivers should feel safe to go into services and feel that they can relax and sleep. I think most HGV drivers understand that actually just it being in lay-by, potentially on their own, may not be the safest place to sleep. Whilst there is an issue within the UK, and as I said earlier, in relation to incidents against HGV drivers and their lorries within service station, I want to give that confidence as well to the HGV drivers that whilst I am talking about offences, it is still a very small amount of offences. It's not to sort of minimise any victims that have been, victims of a crime within a service station, but it is still a small minority. We in Warwickshire are often putting out unmarked police vehicles to patrol the service stations to see if we can detect and deter any crime. But what I'm actually going to take back from this myself is actually my teams to also go out in marked police vehicles. So actually, rather than just driving around a car park, to actually get out and engage with HGV drivers on foot, to have conversations with HGV drivers, so they've got someone to talk to if they are on their own, and they've got some person to talk to and discuss what they've seen during that day, and also we can potentially get intelligence from some of our colleagues in the HGV world.
Thanks. And Kate, from a health perspective, what would you like to see both drivers and employers doing to improve the health lot of drivers?
Absolutely. I think there's a starting point already. I think people are becoming more aware. I would love to see that employers give education and support for their drivers. I think that's a really big key, that they understand the risk from what diabetes is specifically, but other health conditions, but also that it's safe to come forward. We know that if they come forward, we can get a lot more support and help and keep them well and in the industry. I think the employer has a lot of opportunities. We think, like it's just been said on the video, small steps. So I don't think it's always necessarily the big grandeur of a salad. One less sugar in a coffee, 6 cups a day is 1 kilogram less a month. In the year, that's 12 bags of sugar. That's a huge impact from health. We need to do those small steps, things that are doable on the road. It's not an easy lifestyle. It needs to be gradual. So yeah, I think it's around education and the small steps and supporting the drivers. And again, the respect for the drivers that they are doing the best. And how do we help and encourage them to know it's safe to come forward and feel they don't need to carry that burden on the road on their own.
And Mark, some final thoughts for you and maybe what employers can do more generally to mitigate some of the safety risks we've discussed?
I think it's interesting. We've focused and spoken about driver health and wellbeing a lot this morning. I'm just thinking back to that little piece of video where we spoke about mental health, or the driver spoke about mental health as though it's something different from health. It's not. It's a part of that health package of a driver. And we all have health. We have good health. We have bad health. We all have mental health, good health and bad health, and we all change, and it changes through the time and periods. And I think it's just that ability in creating that environment, we come back to that again, where drivers, their supervisors, their mates feel able to address the issue. And what is going through my mind, we've spoken about health and we've spoken about safety. And what I'd really like to remind viewers of the podcast of is we all have health and safety obligations. We all have legal responsibilities. And one of the things that frustrates me immensely in my role is the number of organisations I deal with which have got extremely robust health and safety practices within the workplace, within the walls, yet somehow seem to forget that their responsibilities extend out to all of their drivers, whether it be HGV drivers or van drivers, company car, grey fleet drivers. Those obligations extend out onto the roads as well. And I think as more businesses start grasping the fact that they do have not just these legal responsibilities, but these moral and ethical responsibilities, then we, as Kate says, we will start to make progress in the space.
Thank you very much, everybody. And that wraps up this part of the discussion now. In a couple of minutes, we'll continue the conversation as we look at some of the questions and comments that you put in the chat. Before we do that, however, James Luckhurst has caught up with John Comer from Volvo Trucks.
Thank you, Simon. Really enjoyed that conversation, and we'll look forward to what comes through on the chat function. We are here at Volvo Trucks, so it would be remiss of us not to take a look at what happened with the very first Euro NCAP truck results. Here to tell us more, John Comer from Volvo. You did quite well.
Yeah, we did really well, and of course it's really important to us that we did well, because Volvo brand has stood for safety for so many years. If you play word association games, the very first word you think of when it comes to Volvo is safety. So we were delighted with the results, working with our safety director, Anna, in Sweden. The key element about the Euro NCAP is not about the effect or after effect of the accident, it's avoiding the accident in the first place.
So how does that support what we've been talking about in terms of driver well-being? How do the systems back up what the driver needs to do?
Well, the systems are there. We have to remember we aren't autonomous. We're automated, and again, according to the law and according to the business, the driver is still in control. But the driver can drive for 4.5 hours. Your mind can wander. And one of the beauties of the systems is that if something should go awry, the systems are there to support in a situation that may have been missed because of the mind being somewhere else.
Do you get a chance to talk to drivers as to what they really want, what would help them, and perhaps also what may distract them?
Well, again, I think the key element on with the driver is a proper driver handover. The really important thing is to explain to drivers what these systems can do, because again, if you read on social media, you hear, I've got an anti-collision system. Well, no, you haven't. So you really need to understand what the system does, but more importantly, what the system doesn't do, because again, the driver's still in control. But as I say, if the situation go a little bit awry, the systems are there in terms of support. So a good driver handover is really important. And again, the other key concern in terms of the system design is obviously intuitive as well. And also we need to think about overload in terms of the systems. What do the buzzers, what do the warnings, what do the haptic messages actually tell the driver? So I say the biggest danger that you have is not understanding what the systems that will do. I mean, you think about early ABS systems on a car. If you weren't explained, you went for the brake and you got feedback through the pedal, and bang, and then people thought, oh, something wrong, I'll take the foot off. But yeah, so it's really important to get that message across in terms of a great driver handover.
Okay, well, I hope you found that discussion interesting, and hopefully you're all able to view the video. I think it seemed to be running nice and smoothly, so I hope that worked quite well. If our panelists are on the call now, perhaps you could all turn your cameras on as well, please. We've had quite a few questions and comments coming through, so I'm going to go through those in a moment for you. We got any panelists?
Simon.
Oh, brilliant.
Simon.
Fantastic. Right. Are you, I can't see any of you. Have you got you able to turn your cameras on, or?
They're on.
Oh, right. Okay. I can't see it. Right. Okay. Who is anyone missing, or have we got everyone? We've got Mark, Kate, Simon and Chris.
Yep, Simon.
In the group.
Yeah. Brilliant.
Chris is here. I've had a message from Cy Paul. He's out doing some silly policing stuff, but he should be with us before the close.
Right. No problem. No problem. Thanks, Chris. Okay. We've got quite a few questions come in, quite a few directed for you, Kate. One of the first ones, a couple of the panelists mentioned the sort of average age of HGV drivers, sort of late 50s, 60, that kind of thing. someone questioning, why is it that older HGV drivers are at higher risk for obesity, hypertension, diabetes, and high cholesterol and cardiovascular diseases?
Yeah, I think, well, firstly, that's a very medical question, and we're going to not go too medical on here because that's not our background. We're not medical professionals. But in terms of the question of why older drivers, I don't know whether it's necessarily older drivers or older people as a whole. We see diabetes generally rise in older age. I think we need to be very cautious of how we put things together and block ill health. With all the conditions we just mentioned, they all rise with age, irrespective of job role. There may be increases, and we don't have this clinical data. We don't have the evidence to say that it's higher in drivers than it is in individuals as a generic statement like that. What we can say is from our survey data of 500 people, we know there was a 1 in 3 over 55 professional drivers with diabetes, but it's a small sample of 500. So I think we'd have to be cautious. In terms of answering the question generically, our bodies change with time. Time under pressure, I think, is one of the things, especially as society's pressures continue to change. The body is complex. When we start playing with any hormone system, we play with the rest. As one thing changes, it has an impact on the other, from blood pressure or diabetes. So I think it's quite a complex condition. It always comes back to the same solution of looking after ourselves and doing better to take more pressure off the body so it can live lighter, if we're going to use that terminology. But from a medical position, we can't state that it's worse for professional drivers. What we can do is say that what can we do to ensure day to day we can provide the best, healthier ways to keep people active and well. It's quite a skirting question, but intentionally because of the clinical side of that question. I'll happily take that further offline if anyone wants to.
Brilliant. And actually a follow on from that was whether you could suggest any strategies that diabetic lorry drivers could adopt to effectively manage blood sugar levels during long journeys, considering the limited access to healthy food and exercise opportunities that we mentioned during the discussion.
Absolutely. So some of the key stuff is thinking about proteins. So proteins, nuts, as long as you don't have a nut allergy, eggs, fish, meat, all slow down sugar reactive foods that are carbohydrates, breads, pastas and cereals. So for long journeys, we want to have more of the protein and vegetable rich sort of foods that mean that we don't have the sugar spikes, because they break down more slowly over time, which means that during those driving periods, you can have a much more stable blood sugar rather than the high spikes that would be caused from just kind of a very heavy sound, like more bread than the filling. So more fillings, more proteins, more vegetables will slow all of that down. And we can certainly share anything moving forward on that. But it's how we keep away from those starchy carbs that cause blood sugar rushes during those long drives would really help minimize the spikes and put the blood sugar in a better place.
Brilliant. And Mark, if I can put the next one to you. One of the questions was, what can employers do to support drivers by creating an environment that supports more healthier eating? But actually, it's wider than that, isn't it? Because you've got a lot of the work that both you and I've done with National Highways and DFBB, looking at this kind of silent epidemic of depression and mental health issues and all these driver distraction issues. So on a broader point, what can employers and driver managers do to just create a more supportive environment?
It's a real sweeping generalisation answer this size, so do forgive me, but basically is extend the same level of support and courtesy and all the rest of it to their drivers as they do to the people working in their offices, in their stores, in their factories, etc., etc., etc. Because I genuinely see quite a frequent disconnect between the employees that people can see and they're interacting with on pretty much a regular kind of basis, and the guys and girls who are kind of, around the corner and out of sight, to be a little bit flippant about it. Most businesses know how to do this. It's just that it doesn't tend to get extended to their, as I say, out of sight workforce.
And Chris, I guess you could sort of speak for yourself and for Si here as well. When if you're talking to drivers or the police are talking to drivers at the side of the road, there's a sort of a line to straddle between do you go for strict enforcement or a bit of education to the drivers to help them out? Where do you stand on that? Are you able to sort of encourage drivers to support themselves a bit more, or point them in the direction of where they can get support, where that it's obvious that support's needed?
Absolutely. We've still got this beautiful thing in this country whereby police officers have got this incredible power called discretion, and education in the main. Prevention is always better than detection. Now, don't get me wrong. If a police officer is confronted by a most serious situation and clearly enforcement is only the viable option, then that's what's got to happen. But even with enforcement, an education package can come with it. You're not going to stop talking to the driver. But in the main, for me today is about underlining the education, the working together, the let's have a conversation. I'm sure there's people on this call today who are aware of an initiative that I think originates in Germany because of the name of it, the Stammtisch way of thinking, which is let's all sit round the table and have a conversation. I would love to revisit that sort of approach in a motorway service area type environment. Let's pull up a table, let's talk to each other, not find fault with each other. Let's talk to each other and just try and improve the situation overall by just good dialogue and good conversation. And I don't want to hog things, Simon, but I do want, before we finish, I want to say something about motorway service areas.
I'll come back to you on that one before we go. Kate, one of the questions was if one of your drivers, if you're a driver manager, if one of your drivers feels able to come forward and admit that they're diabetic, how would you expect an employer to deal with that driver? What would good practice look like for that?
I think good practice starts with people inside the organisation understanding diabetes, the different variants, understanding what is likely to be needed. And so the conversation starts, well, I certainly know for people living with type 1, they get frustrated when they're branded into type 2 and undone. So if someone had their right decision to come forward and confident, I think we need employers or management to understand diabetes in the first instance and have enough general knowledge of that. And then to ask what is actually needed. So everyone with diabetes could be on a different part of their journey. They may have just got diagnosed and only be managing it through food. Others may be right up to insulin, where there are different DVLA requirements. So I think, again, organisations having a base understanding of DVLA requirements, then the right conversation can be had and the questions can be asked of what would be helpful for you, what does this need to look like, and kind of what needs to be in place around your breaks to ensure that you can manage your condition well.
Thanks. We've got another couple. This was an interesting point that someone made, and that's that when we're talking about some of the challenges drivers face, we do it in quite a negative way. So when you talk about things like driver fatigue is a negative thing that you're measuring, which might discourage drivers from coming forward and raising that as an issue. Whereas if you talked about driver alertness, it becomes a positive thing that you're trying to improve. Mark, you got any thoughts on that?
I think that's a really valid point, to be perfectly honest with you. I mean, Si, a lot of the work that we do, we're very keen to I'm trying to think of a better word than defend, but I can't think of one at the moment. But we're trying to defend the HGV drivers' position. We know that they're professional drivers. Bluntly, they're amongst the best drivers on our roads. They're very professional, very skilled individuals. So for me, I'm always looking for a way that helps them improve, become even better at what they do. But I'm very keen to stress that we're never really trying to pull this from a negative point of view. So it's why I try and talk an awful lot about driver well-being rather than driver illnesses, and I take on board entirely the point about fatigue alertness. It's how we put a positive spin and encourage people to engage on this. I do think as a kind of a nation, we almost conspire against it a little bit. I mean, most HGV drivers are male. I mean, that's just fact of life out of a certain age. And, being a little bit flippant, they may be genetically predisposed to keep as far clear as doctors and medical professions as they possibly can. But even within that, there's a fear that by approaching medical services, they're going to rule them out of their way of earning a living. So there's nothing really there, in my opinion, to particularly encourage drivers to seek to be even better at what they do, certainly from a mental and physical well-being point of view.
Brilliant. We're up to the hour, so I've got one more question, and then we'll start to wrap up, which I'm going to direct to you, Chris, and hopefully you can answer this, but you might not be able to. But one of the questions was, are the UK's HGV drivers particularly badly done by? Do you know how our situation compares to that in other countries, in Europe, for instance?
Wow, that's a big one. I don't think today I could give you an all-embracing, totally defining answer, but I'll give you my own personal view. Are HGV drivers hard done by in this country? So I'm talking of the roads of England, Wales, Scotland sort of thing. I personally think not. And I say that because we then get into the difficult territory of how well are we policing our roads? How much of a policing presence have we got on our strategic roads? And the hard fact is not enough. Now, that's not to say we want more on there to oppress HGV drivers. Absolutely not. We're talking about education and positive behavioural influence today. But in one sense, if there was more strategic roads policing by skilled roads policing officers, you might say even more stuff could be coming under scrutiny, and HGV drivers might feel under even more pressure, you might argue. In terms of a more global view, a more European-wide view, I'd have to go off and do some research.
Brilliant. Thank you. You wanted to make a final comment on MSAs before we went?
I did. Very coincidentally yesterday, I was in conversation with an individual from what's called a community safety partnership. Now, I've got to be careful what I say in one respect, but let's say this individual works on an area on which we've got a very busy motorway service area. And we were talking about the level of crime that gets recorded on both service areas, both northbound and southbound. And what I'm going to start pushing at is the relationship between the owners of the motorway service area and HGV drivers, because you might argue motorway service areas are very happy to have HGV drivers and the like on the area, spending money, so on and so forth. But when it comes to spending money on the security of the car park they're using with a view to preventing and deterring crime, all of a sudden the conversation becomes a bit awkward. And all I'm going to say today is I'm going to stick a flag in the ground to start saying we need to have some different conversations with the owners of motorway service areas. It might be difficult, but we've got to have conversations. We have got to have a complete rethink about how motorway service areas in particular are protected and prevents and deter determined criminals coming onto them.
Fantastic. Thanks, Chris. I'm going to have to leave it there. We've got some other questions, but what we'll try and do is answer those afterwards and post the answers with the recording when that goes live. So Kate, Mark and Chris, thank you very much for your contributions to that and taking part in the discussion. I'm just going to quickly share my screen one last time because we've got our next webinar coming up in 2 weeks tomorrow, so Wednesday the 26th of February. It's about something new called the Safe System Knowledge Exchange, which provides a gateway to learning for road safety professionals, helping to develop an understanding of the culture and the principles and the practices that make up safe system delivery. So that's going to be a really interesting one. This is a new knowledge resource, and the webinar will be an opportunity to hear from those at the heart of this project and to ask questions on any element of the safe system. And that's going to be presented by Adrian Walsh, who's Executive Director of Road Safe, and Professor Nick Reed. And we'll be focusing on this one, the first of a pair of webinars on exactly what the safe system is and what technology is required to deliver it. So Thank you all again for attending. Glad you all enjoyed that. The questions we had some very good questions, and we'll post that up with the recording of the webinar, and we'll let you all know by email when that's up as soon as we can. Thank you very much.